The big engines had gone on strike, so the Fat Controller had them shut up in the sheds. Edward and Thomas were now running the main line, while Percy ran the branch line. It wasn't an ideal situation, especially for Edward, who often struggled to pull the express, but the three engines did their best. Percy enjoyed running up the branch, listening to the songs Annie and Clarabelle sang as they puffed along. One day, Percy was waiting at the station with Thomas as their passengers changed from the local to the branch line train. Percy was observing the passengers. He spotted a man pull out a small cardboard box and then place a little white stick in his mouth, which he then set ablaze. He was very puzzled, even more so when smoke started to puff from the man's mouth.
"What's that man doing?"
he asked Thomas.
He's smoking,"
replied Thomas.
"Smoking? I thought only engines did that."
Thomas chuckled.
"No, silly. People smoke these things called cigarettes as a hobby. My driver always keeps a pack on him." "Oh, I see,"
said Percy, who didn't see at all.
"My guard doesn't approve of my driver smoking. He calls it a dirty habit. Speak of the devil, I must be off. Bye, Percy. Take care of Annie and Clarabelle. Toodaloo!"
chimed Annie and Clarabelle. But Percy was too distracted by the idea of smoking to peep a goodbye. A few weeks later, a new shipment of coal arrived from the mainland. It was a much cheaper source of coal, and it wasn't very good. Edward, Percy, and Thomas were all beginning to feel very stuffed up. Large amounts of clinger began to form in their fireboxes, which made them most uncomfortable. "Imagine having to use that filthy rubbish," chortled Gordon in the sheds one evening, as Thomas and Edward were being cleaned.
"It certainly wouldn't suit such important engines like us,"
chuckled James.
"You know, the only reason we have to use cheaper coal is because you three refuse to work. Therefore, we don't have enough money for our normal lot,"
huffed Edward, who sounded all bunged up.
"Perhaps the Fat Controller should sell you lot off,"
teased Thomas.
"Then we could have high-quality coal again."
The big engines grumbled and muttered to each other as Edward and Thomas laughed amongst themselves. One grey and dreary afternoon, Percy was once again sitting at the junction waiting for Thomas. He wrinkled his nose several times, trying not to sneeze.
"We'll have to speak to the Fat Controller about this coal. I'm sick of cleaning out your firebox,"
groaned Percy's fireman. At last Thomas arrived, and he was out of puff.
"Sorry I'm late, Percy,"
wheezed Thomas.
I had trouble building my fire this morning, thanks to that new coal."
Thomas's driver then stepped out of his cab and placed a cigarette in his mouth.
"Look, Thomas, your driver is... Achoo!"
Soot poured from Percy's funnel and showered the station. It covered some of the passengers, the station master, and Thomas's driver. Thomas guffawed with laughter as people crowded around Percy and his crew in anger. Thomas's driver had angrily put out his cigarette and stormed back to his engine.
"Oh dear, Percy. I know the coal doesn't agree with you, but You don't have to make it everybody else's problem, too, laughed Thomas as the guard blew his whistle. After all, that's a rather dirty habit.
Percy said nothing. He was most humiliated, though he was relieved the big engines weren't around to see. He felt even more embarrassed when the Fat Controller came to speak to him.
I'm sorry, sir. I never meant to.
That's quite all right, Percy, interrupted the Fat Controller. It isn't entirely your fault. I've received a number of complaints from the crews and Edward. But I'll sort out this coal problem immediately.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. How will you do that, sir?
With a little persuasion, said the Fat Controller, as he tightened his hat and returned to his car. Percy chortled to himself. He knew exactly who the Fat Controller was going to speak to, and he was very glad he wasn't one of the big engines. But I mustn't tell you any more, or I shall spoil the next story.